Boog, Sciambi, Dave Sims, announcers on, and we welcome in our next guest, the voice of the Chicago Cubs, Len Kasper. How are you, brother? What have you been up to?
Hello from my Chicago lair.
Yeah, like it.
Yeah. No, I mean, life is good considering. I wake up every day, not quite sure what day of the week it is, which is kind of a mid-season feeling. And then I think, what am I doing today? And then I realize I really don't have anything to do today. It's really weird.
Scary, isn't it?
It is. And where I live, and I know, Boog can attest to New York where the weather's inconsistent this time of year. When you get a really nice day, that's when I really miss being at the ballpark. It's like, oh, yeah, sun is shining, 72 degrees. I feel like I should be at Wrigley.
Yeah, no question. What's the mood in Chicago?
I think right now it's all about health. New York got hit obviously harder than anybody, but the Chicago numbers are starting to get unfortunately large. And, I've noticed, and I live a little bit north of the city, people are definitely wearing masks. They're doing the social distancing. That's good. I think baseball right now is kind of a back burner topic. There are just so many other things that we got to get through before it's a realistic conversation. And the Bulls hired a new head of basketball operations. So, any bit of sports morsels that come out, that ends up dominating sports talk.
Karnisovas, I did a lot of his games when he was with Seton Hall playing for PJ. Yeah, he was a good player. I hope that's a good move for the Bulls. I hope that works out for you. Had we be playing baseball right now, what type of team were the Cubs going to be, as from what you could tell in that truncated spring training?
Well, for the first time in about 6 years, I think the range of possibilities in terms of the record is probably pretty big. Under Joe Madden, 15 was kind of the year they surprised some people, but since that year, everyone assumed the Cubs would be pretty good. And I think if they did everything right this year, you could assume that they would be right there at the end of the year. But there's not a lot of depth in the starting rotation. There's some age with Lester, Quintana, Darvish, and not a lot of depth behind them. So if they had some injuries, I could see it going the other direction. But for me, the biggest question was the division itself. Aside from the Pirates, all the other teams feel like they're playoff contenders. And when you play 19 against everybody, I think it would have been a very competitive National League Central. But, the big thing for me was just watching David Ross do his thing. And the good news is he's Rossi. He didn't change a bit, which I think is what you want to see. But he also looked like he was born to manage, and I was really curious to see how that would go.
You and I got a chance to connect when you were hired with the Marlins. Was it 2002?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we were there together, and then you left, and you got the Cubs job in 2005. How have things changed in terms of, I guess, broad scope, the way the fans react and the market overall since you started in 2005? Because as keeping in mind what you just said, you still just finished the time where it was basically World Series or bust for the Cubs, and that's a pretty big jump from where you entered the mix in 2005, right?
No question about it. It was the Dusty Baker era, and in fact, coming off 2003 and 04, the fans were, I'll just say it, they were a little assy. There was a lot about the team that the fans didn't really like. And part of it, too, was that Chip and Stoney left. And so I not only was the new guy, I was the new guy along with Bob Brenly. We were the new tandem.
Yep.
So typically when you join a team, you're there with the guy who's been there for a while, and you kind of ride his coattails. So I would say the first year might have been a little bumpy in terms of people getting used to my style. I would joke with the morning guy at the Score, who I became friends with later. My alarm went off one day, and the station was the alarm. And literally at like 7:05 a.m., here's what I hear. Len and Bob, they're not good.
Oh, jeez.
That's the first
baby.
thing I heard in the morning.
Oh,
Like,
Oh,
yeah, okay, that's fun.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
But that
Wow.
changed, and I think Chicago's a market where once you show that you're kind of part of the team, so to speak, and you're a Chicago person, and that's where our sport is really good. You do it every day. Once you're in, and I have felt in, I guess, ever since.
been there with the Cubs since '05. Where'd you grow up, and who were your broadcast inspirations?
Dave, I grew up in mid-Michigan, from Shepherd, Michigan, which is about 5 miles south of Mount Pleasant. As you know, Dick Enberg, the late Dick Enberg, went to Central Michigan University. So Paul Caray from Mount Pleasant. I actually worked for Paul's nephew, Mike, when I was in high school. And Ernie Harwell and Paul Caray were my guys on Tigers Radio, and George Kell and Al Kaline, who passed away recently, as you guys know, were the guys on television. So they were kind of my entrance into baseball. And, I watched WGN and Harry and Stoney, and I watched TBS with Ernie and Skip and Pete and all those guys. But fortunate that I got to know most of them pretty well. And unfortunately, all four guys with the Tigers are now gone, which is really sad for me to think about in a lot of ways.
Oh, I hear you.
You think about your Cubs time. Have you done it now longer than Harry Caray did it, or as long as Harry Caray was a Cubs broadcaster?
So this would be my 16th season with the Cubs, and Harry did 16 with the Cubs from 82 to 97.
Right.
He passed away just before the 98 season. And that's amazing to me because I think of Harry with the Cubs as having been there 30 years.
Forever.
Because of the impact he had. But he was not a young man when he got that job. I'm guessing he was in his 60s when he got the Cubs job.
Oh, every bit. My first encounter with Harry was when I was at Satellite News Channel. We were doing sports at 15 and 45, ABC Westinghouse venture, trying to compete with Ted Turner, and it was great when we would revolve shifts, and I loved it when I was on in the afternoon and I could see the Cubs in action with Harry and Stoney. I loved it. I love listening to those guys.
Well, it was just so great for me to come home from school and being in the Eastern time zone. The games, were probably in the second or third inning when I would get home from school. And I just remember the fact that I could watch not a game of the week, but a local broadcast that wasn't from my home state. And it just,
that was cool.
Yeah, it kind of blew me away. And it people often ask, what is it like to sit in that chair? And I don't know. I mean, I would ask you guys that when you get questions like that. It overwhelms you if you think about it all the time, but I do definitely think about it, and I don't take it lightly.
My first encounter with Harry, I'll clean it up. It's a family. My first encounter with him was I was a broadcaster with the Marlins in 1997, and it was one of my first road games. It was bitterly cold. I mean, 30s at Wrigley Field. Alex Fernandez pitched to Jen that day, but I was the pregame, postgame radio guy, in-game scores, but I traveled. So I finished doing the lineups, and I really, really had to go to the bathroom. So I finished doing the lineups, and I run to the restroom because I got to get back just to turn it over to Joe Angel and Dave O'Brien. And I go in, and now I'm washing my hands. And you guys have been in there. It's 2 urinals in a stall. It's still 2 urinals in a stall. Sorry, everybody. And as I'm washing my hands, Harry goes in. He goes into the stall. And from the stall, not to me, just out loud, he goes, I got so many clothes on, I can't find my. And I was like, and then I just dried my hands and ran back to go tell Dave O'Brien the story. That was it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, and this is not the most comfortable topic in the world. Look, I ran the board at a small station when I was in college. I went home during the summer, and it was a Tigers radio affiliate. So I'm running the board the first spring that your good friend and colleague Rick Riz and Bob Rathman are the new voices of the Tigers. And, Rick and I have talked about it a few times. I immediately liked Rick. I had not heard his work with the Mariners, but I immediately liked him. A lot of people wouldn't give him a chance because he wasn't Ernie. And that's the thing about our sport more than any other, is that when fans get used to a voice, the guy who replaces the guy, it's really difficult. And, I'm sure, and Rick has never talked to me about it at length, but that had to hurt because he knew he was good, but he wasn't Ernie. And to be put in that situation is really unfair, and it's very difficult. The old adage for all of us we know is you want to replace the guy who replaces the guy.
Absolutely.
That's not always possible. I'm so happy that Rick ended up back in a very comfortable situation where he belonged. And I think if he had stayed in Detroit, fans would have eventually warmed up to him, and he would have been known as the voice of the Tigers for the next couple of generations. But it's a weird thing in our sport, isn't it, that when you replace someone who's been there a long time, and especially someone like Harry or Ernie or Jack Buck, it's really difficult to get them on your side.
I can relate to that because when I got to the Mariners in 2007, Dave Niehaus was still very much alive. And he would start the game on TV, do the first three. I would be on with Rick. I'd do the hi, how are you, and then turn it over to Rick. And then Dave and I would pass each other in the hallway going into the fourth inning. Everybody, these guys really, hey, what a game. All right, one of those kind of things. And I can remember that first year in 2007, my oldest son, he texted me, he says, Dad, you get freaking killed on their message boards. But it has since calmed down, and it's just a matter, it took me, it takes you a while to get used to the market and vice versa. And, things are a heck of a lot better now going into year 14. But I totally I've lived what you're talking about. That's the East Coast guy, the black guy coming in and basically replacing Niehaus, has been there forever and is the only voice many people out there knew.
And I'm sure now people say to Dave Sims, you're part of our family.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no question. I've even heard it during our downtime here this last month.
Well, I don't feel bad for either of you because now I get to be the jackass national guy that doesn't know anything about the Mariners or the Cubs that parachutes in. Get that guy out of here. Sciambi doesn't know anything about our team.
Hey, why don't you get the Mariners on Sunday Night Baseball a little more often?
Oh,
yeah.
And then it's funny that you bring that up because I do Sunday nights on the radio. I do the midweeks on TV. But it was at Dodger Stadium, and I'm not taking a shot at the Mariners, okay? This is the thing. I said the Cubs guys all surround me, and they're like, Uncle on the Sunday night baseball games. And I look at them and I go, hey, don't be good then. We won't put you on. Don't. And they were all like, oh, hadn't thought of that. Okay, good point.
Yeah, I would love. Hey, I would love for us to be on Sunday night baseball and get that national exposure a lot more. But
if you guys had the Astros record the last 4 years, you could be darn sure that the Mariners would be on Sunday night baseball.
Understood.
Yeah.
But I would also say, even the years when we lost 100 games, the Cubs get a built-in 5 or 6 no matter what.
No question.
Yeah.
No question. Hey, so I mean, obviously, ending the curse in 2016 is big. But give me some personal moments in your career, things that stand out that emotionally meant a lot to you.
Well, yeah, 16 was pretty special, and there's a comparison that I would make to a team that I followed as a fan. It was the '84 Tigers. The Cubs were kind of the best team in the league from Jump Street. I think the playoffs, though, were interesting because all 3 series, there were moments where you didn't think they were going to make it. I definitely think about being in the booth during Game 7. And then going down to the clubhouse because I'm doing a radio interview right after the game. So we're on about a 10-second delay on the monitor in front of the Cubs clubhouse. And Chapman's facing Rajai Davis. And so I'm hearing sounds of the ballpark before I'm seeing what's happening. And I think the Indians' family room was just down the corridor. And so I kept hearing gasps and just near misses and things. And all of a sudden during this long at bat, I just hear them go crazy. And I look at my producer and I'm like, no, it was just a single, right? It was a base hit. I'm like, no, home run, and just before that happened, all the MLB workers had the T-shirts, so like the hanging T-shirts. They had the chests full of champagne. I mean, they're wheeling all that stuff into the Cubs clubhouse. 15 seconds after that ball landed in the left field seats, they're all coming out of our clubhouse. They're going, go down to the Indians clubhouse. So like it's that surreal moment where the entire series is in the balance. Then the rain delay happens. I go back up to the radio booth, and like as you remember, it just instantly ended. It was 17 minutes. And I watched the final inning from just behind the visitors' dugout, and all I could see as I looked up was the backside of John Lester, and he was kind of nervously standing there. And so I had the headphones on, and I heard Pat Hughes' final call. I get on the field. The first guy I interviewed was Justin Grimm. He dropped a 4-letter word in the first sentence. The second guy I interviewed was Dexter Fowler. He not only dropped a 4-letter word, but he dropped that 4-letter word. And I threw it back to Pat, and, I don't think they bleeped any of it. We were not on delay, and I don't think any Cub fan cared. But it reminded me of my dad a long time ago told me that he was watching Game 7 of the '68 series when the Tigers beat the Cardinals. And after that game, I think it was Dick McCullough, one of the Tiger players was interviewed on Channel 4 in Detroit or whatever, and they were dropping F-bombs all over the place. And I think that the comparison is when you're in that moment and you're that excited, you just don't care, right? It's David Ortiz at Fenway Park, and I think most people would forgive you for that.
Decorum goes out the window with those kinds of emotions. And, I mean, it had only been, 108 years, so, there was an allowable, Tell me, now you said you worked with Brenly when you first got to, you were working with Jimmy Deshaies, a catcher and a pitcher. What's that been like?
Really cool. Brenly as a former catcher and a big league manager could talk about everything. He could talk about hitting. He could talk about pitching, managerial decisions. JD is kind of the left-handed version of Brenly. The thing I really like about JD in particular is his curiosity. And Boog and I talk a lot about this too. And you're one of these guys, Dave, where we don't know everything. I think there are times in a broadcast when you may be caught with something where you're not quite sure what the answer is, or you don't really have an opinion, but you feel compelled to give it. And the thing about JD that's great is he will say, I don't know, or what do you think? Or he'll be talking about something and he'll go, was that right? Or was that, and he'll just ask me and he'll put me on the spot. And at first it's a little jarring when a partner does that. And there's some guys who do what we do who would not want to be put in that position. But I think you earn a lot of credibility with your audience when you realize, we're all human and it's just a conversation. And that's one thing JD does very well. BB did it great too. But there's kind of a left-handed quirkiness that Deshaies has that I'm really in tune with.
I like that. Yeah, Boog.
It's funny because I think back one of our and I know that this is on the down low, but I'll out it a little bit here. It's funny because if you think about your history as a broadcaster and go back, one of probably the most memorable games that you've ever been at, certainly that I've ever been at, would be at the expense of the Cubs. So that would be when you were with the Marlins and, we were there. I was broadcasting on the radio. You did some radio as well for 2003. And in particular, Game 6, when the Marlins were down to their final 5 outs, down 3-1, and, broke the Cubs' hearts then.
I dipped into the Cubs radio booth before the top of the 8th. So Pryor's still on the mound. It's 3-0. It was Pat Hughes. Steve Stone was filling in because Ronnie was sick. Andy Mazer was their pre- and post-game guy. And I literally ducked my head in and said, guys, congratulations. Because I knew all hell was going to break loose when they won the pennant. And John, you and I were kind of like, yeah, it's been a good run. we're gonna watch the Cubs win their first pennant since 1945. And then obviously the Bartman play, Alex Gonzalez, who I believe led the league in fielding percentage, made that error. They at least get one out, maybe get a double play out of it. But as that inning is unfolding, I just remember saying to you or to somebody in the booth, like, why do they keep showing this guy in the stands? And we were worried for his safety for obvious reasons. And then a whole inning blew up. I was in the dugout after that game, and I interviewed Derek Lee, and he said, I want to play Game 7 right now. And that's the one thing I remember about that night. The fans were angry. They wanted to turn over our team bus after the game. Game 7, though, and I'm curious what you think, Boog, it felt more like a funeral. It was very quiet before the game, and after the game, it was quiet as well. I think the anger that we saw for Game 6 was not there for Game 7. It was kind of like they went already into acceptance mode in Game 7. But that was instructive for me when I became the Cubs broadcaster, just how heavy and how important Cubs baseball was and is to Cubs fans all over the world.
Well, the one thing I think I would disagree with, at least, I mean, it's anecdotal, but there are people that tell me that for every moment in 2016 in recent memory, the loudest that they've heard Wrigley Field was when Kerry Wood hit the homer in Game 7.
I agree with that.
I mean, like, I felt unsafe in the press box.
Yeah. No, I agree. That was the loudest I've ever heard Wrigley. Yep. And then
I'm totally with you. And then it died. I mean, it just died. Yeah. And even while being with the Marlins, you felt some of the pain there.
Boy, that's tough.
Yeah.
That is tough. Hey, Len, we got to go, but we appreciate you giving us some time, man. And all the best to you. And hopefully we'll all be back to work before you know it. I know it's easier said than done, but I really appreciate you giving us some really good insights and some sharing some really good stories, man. I appreciate it big time.
Yeah, I'm going to call you at 7:05 tomorrow morning, and I'm just going to say, Len and JD, they're not good, and hang up on you.
Thanks for having me on, guys. And Dave, maybe the Cubs and Mariners will be in the same division this year. Who knows?
That looks like that could happen. Yes, indeed. All right, Lenny. Thank you for announcers on.
Thank you.
Thanks,
for
guys.
Boog, Sciambi, I'm Dave Sibbs. Everybody, thanks for joining us here on Announcers On.